thank the member. I call the member for Perth.
Thank you. I will never forget my first time in the front seat of a car. It was love at first drive, accelerating at 100 kilometres an hour down the Mitchell Freeway in my first drive in an electric vehicle. I had decided that it was time for me to take that jump and get rid of the much-loved Mazda CX-5 that had done so well for me and the family, and shift to an electric vehicle. And in doing so, I had one key criteria, which was that the electric car we would get had to fit the double pram that Leo and Ruby relied upon to get around with me and Jess day to day. And so I took my double pram down to the car yard, I folded it all up, and I crossed my fingers that that pram would fit in the car. And indeed, it did. And so for me, as the 2 days ago, celebrating my 1 year as a owner and driver of an electric vehicle, 9,436 kilometres later, that vehicle has gotten me everywhere, every day of the year, be it a weekend, a Monday, a Tuesday. These cars are the future. My electric vehicle has come with me when I visited Morris Zephyr home, where I celebrated Dora Caverson's 108th birthday last week. Someone who has seen so much technological change in her lifetime, and so much more to come in the many exciting years ahead for Dora. It's taken me to the Bassendean Men's Shed, where members of my community do work tinkering with old electronics, men building things, and it's not an exclusively men's shed, despite the name. And again, people who've seen that huge technological shift in our cars, in our radios, in everything, embracing that change. In small businesses, it's driven me to places like Miller & Baker, a fabulous bakery in my electorate. It's taken me to the workshops of Australian Vanadium, who are also looking at new battery technologies to make sure that we can meet the climate challenges that are ahead of us. It took me to the press conference that allowed me to talk about not just the future, but the ancient history in this land, announcing with Premier Mark McGowan the Aboriginal Cultural Centre that we will build at Terrace Road Car Park in the centre of the Perth CBD. And indeed, it got me to the announcement with the now Prime Minister, where we announced that Bayswater and Dianella would be beneficiaries of community batteries, allowing people to store the energy that they are producing on their roofs so they can use it to charge their electric vehicles or to provide stability in the grid. And I come to this knowing this is a complex debate for the people who work in the automotive industry. I was at the Motor Trades Association's awards night at Crown Casino a couple of weeks ago, speaking with them and CEO Stephen Moyer about what this transition means for people who've had investments for decades in the motor vehicle industry. I spoke to young apprentices who are learning about all of the technologies that they will need to be able to service the cars of the future. It was an opportunity to talk about how do we make sure that we get the policy settings right, not just for new cars, but indeed for families that may wish to hang on to a vehicle for many years to come. But we can't escape one very clear fact. Australia trails the world when it comes to electric vehicle uptake. But this isn't the fault of Australians. Australians want to do their bit. What we see from surveys is that 54% of Australians are open to buying an electric vehicle as their next car. The problem is that our current policy settings just make these vehicles too expensive for everyday Australians. There are no electric vehicles under $40,000 available in Australia, only 8 models available under $60,000. And us, the Parliament, can change the policy settings to make these things more accessible, more available. But the reality is today, less than 2% of the vehicles sold in Australia are electric or plug-in hybrids. We know that not only does that have to change, but that it will change. We know that transition for our electric vehicles is essential to meet our commitments that I'm looking forward to becoming the law of Australia when they pass through the Senate, so that we can reach net zero by by 2050. And we're debating this legislation at a time which I think is where, over the last 2 years, we saw the now opposition, when they were in government, go through a process of changing all of their economic settings. Very happy. They used to complain in opposition about debt. They were very happy to pile on debt. The bulk of that debt before the pandemic hit. They campaigned against debt. They embraced debt. I also remember when they used to campaign against taxes and say that they wanted to have lower taxes. And this legislation is about getting lower taxes for families who want to choose an electric vehicle. But the party of choice has chosen to rip away choice. The party of taxes has chosen to keep a high tax on electric vehicles for purely ideological reasons. Because this bill will remove fringe benefits tax for battery electric cars. It will remove fringe benefits tax for hydrogen fuel cell electric cars, and it will remove fringe benefits tax for plug-in hybrid electric cars. This will build that second-hand market. It will make sure that people might experience driving an electric vehicle in their workplace, so that some of those worries they have might disappear once they get behind the wheel, once they hit the accelerator, driving, of course, always at the speed limit. When they discover that these cars are as good and in some cases better than the car that they might be thinking about replacing.
Can I just ask a question? If it's an electric vehicle, the sun doesn't shine at night and you've got to reach home.
The member for Kennedy,
I'm just curious.
member for Kennedy, no, that's not the forum. Okay, member for Perth, please continue.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This bill is an important part of the government's wider electric car discount and driving the nation fund policies, making electric cars cheaper, increasing sales and expanding the used car market. This will lead to the necessary reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, passenger transport makes up almost 10% of Australia's carbon dioxide emissions, and our transport sector is one of the largest emitters, and we want to work with the transport sector to make sure that we can bring those emissions down and make the replacement products as affordable as possible. We understand.
Member for Kennedy.
I invite the member for Kennedy, and indeed any member, when they visit the Perth electorate, I'll take them for a drive. I'll show them the battery that's at my house. I'll show you the charging cable. I'll show you the solar panels on my roof. And I'm sure you'll find that it's entirely sustainable to have an electric car on renewable energy. It is cheaper. That's an unavoidable fact that this is the cheapest type of fuel to put in a car today, and will continue to be so for many years to come. Indeed, the Australian Electric Vehicle Association estimated that the average family would have savings of some $500 in fuel and $100 in maintenance every year for families that own an electric car. The data tells us that the standard electric vehicle is about 70% cheaper to run than its petrol equivalent. 90% cheaper if, as I'm fortunate enough to be able to do, is powered from rooftop solar. And on this story of rooftop solar, I think it is worth noting the contribution that former Prime Minister John Howard made on the question of rooftop solar. Those incentives that Prime Minister Howard put in place took us from about 200 rooftop solar panels across Australia when he put that in place in 2001, lifted it up, and we now have millions of households who have rooftop solar and families who are saving as a result of those visionary policies of former Prime Minister John Howard. And indeed, in the years to come, people will realise that the important work that has been done to make sure that electric vehicles are affordable for families, it will go into those. Will go to making sure that we have affordable vehicles, just as former Prime Minister Howard, a legacy that's being trashed by the opposition at the moment, did when it came to solar panels. And I do think that this is not just about passenger vehicles. I want to talk a bit about how this ties in to the broader commitment of the Albanese Labor government in terms of making sure that we have a plan to rebuild our manufacturing industry and also make sure that our public transport sector has a role to play in the renewable energy transition. We've committed some $15 billion into new manufacturing projects, prioritising the use of Australian-made goods, building up our sovereign capacity and making sure that as much as possible Australian-made content goes into the cars, buses and trains of the future.
Member for Kennedy.
And as we roll out these plans to invest in a future made in Australia, one of them is about making electric buses in Perth. At the moment, the bulk of the buses that I catch, the 950, the 960, the 60 and the 652 that gets me to the Fremantle Dockers, most of these bus routes are and hopefully I'll have a few more Dockers games to go over the course of September. Most of these buses are diesel. I've been to the Volgren factory where they're produced. The people who make these buses do a fantastic job. And I want to make sure that those good, secure jobs that they've relied on for decades are there for decades to come. That's why, in partnership with the McGowan Labor government, we're investing some $250 million in an electric bus manufacturing facility in Perth. This means that the buses that will take my kids to school will be electric. It means that the cost of fuel for those buses will be less for the taxpayers of Western Australia and less for the taxpayers of Australia. It means that we'll have 130 in the first run, Perth-built electric buses, and not only protecting the jobs that are there, but 100 new jobs. That helps those 300 workers who are currently in the industry transitioning into green jobs. This is a great success story. These are the things we can achieve when we work together. And again, I'd say when it comes to this renewable energy transition that is going to happen in Australia over coming decades, the more we work together, the better off the Australian people will be. But I can't talk about this legislation that's happening today without talking about the wasted decade that precedes it. We are delivering on this within the first year of this government after 9 years of nothing. We had the 2019 claim by the then Prime Minister that electric vehicles would end the weekend. An absolutely irresponsible and immature statement. We have had we have some of the most narrow options for people who wish to purchase a car because this government the former government sent the wrong messages to the world, saying we don't want this stuff. What we are saying now as the new government is please bring your electric vehicles here, give consumers more choice, and to incentivise that, we will make sure that the tax settings are as favourable as possible in the constrained fiscal environment we face to make sure that more people can enjoy the joy of driving an electric car on the weekend. I will just conclude my remarks by saying that this is one part of a broader Driving the Nation plan. A truly national electric vehicle charging network, 117 new charging stations. I look forward to being able to drive across the Nullarbor, being able to get from Perth to Canberra in my electric vehicle. I have promised the Climate and Energy Minister that I will do exactly that once that network is built. I welcome anyone who is here to join me in that drive. It would be a lot more fun if you were to join me, the member for Kennedy. I look forward to you joining me for that drive. We'll have a national hydrogen highway refuelling network. We'll set a low-emission vehicle target for the Commonwealth fleet of 75% of new leases and purchased vehicles by 2025. We combine that with our commitment to get the Australian Public Service to net zero by 2030, an 82% renewable energy mix by 2030, significant investment in the country's electricity grid, community batteries and solar banks, and we'll have those 9,000 households in Bayswater be able to access a community battery if they choose to charge their car. I hope that before this comes to a vote, those in the opposition find it within them to vote for a tax cut. I know they find it very hard to vote for a tax cut. It's not something that would be naturally in their political DNA to vote for a tax cut, but on this occasion, Deputy Speaker, I urge the opposition to find that opportunity, to find it within themselves, to vote for a tax cut so Australian families can get the affordable cars, the cars of the future, the electric cars They're going to power us towards net zero by 2050. Thank you.
Minister, I agree with you. We work together.